Welcome to the Creating a Family podcast. I'm Tracy Whitney. I am the content manager for Creating a Family, and many of you have already heard the news that our executive director, Dawn Davenport, is retiring this year. I've been co-hosting with her off and on this spring and learning the ropes because eventually I will step into the role of the regular podcast host. Today I'm podcasting solo, but don't worry, Dawn isn't gone yet, and you'll have plenty of other opportunities to hear from her before she does retire. Today I'm excited to talk to Nicole Barlow on the topic that I am probably most passionate about in our work here at Creating a Family, and that's self-care for parents and caregivers. Nicole is a certified wellness coach, a TBRI practitioner, and a parent trainer who equips foster and adoptive parents to care well for their bodies, minds, and spirits so that they can show up well for the kids that they're caring for. She's a fellow mom of 6. 5 of hers are through foster care adoption, and so she brings her real-life experiences and practical tools to help the families that we're supporting on this podcast navigate trauma, regulate their nervous systems, and build lasting connections with their kids. She's also the host of a podcast called Foster Parent Well. So, Nicole, welcome to the Creating a Family podcast. I'm real excited to tackle this topic today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Sometimes the idea of self-care in today's culture can be a little bit muddy, and sometimes it includes or doesn't include things like regular exercise or fancy coffee dates or a spa day or a mani-pedi with your girlfriends. But in my looking over of your website and your other resources, I get the sense that you see self-care pretty differently than those methods.
Yeah, I think that culture has kind of taken over this phrase and it's become like a buzzword. And so self-care has been kind of deemed as something where it's like you get an extra dessert or you get, time with your friends. And that can be self-care. But a lot of the things that are deemed self-care actually are really kind of self-indulgence.
Pampering.
And pampering, which is great, right? But the definition of self-care is actually doing things, taking action to improve your health. And a lot of times the things that we're doing and calling it self-care, binge watching TV, eating a pan of brownies are actually contrary to what true self-care should be.
So why is self-care so crucial to this demographic of people that we're talking to today, the adoptive, foster, or relative caregiving community?
Yeah, so a lot of times we're dealing with a lot more stress in our homes. We're dealing with a lot more chaos. We're taking on a lot more things. And just like trauma and stress affects our kids, trauma and stress affects us. And so if we're not taking care of our bodies, if we're not doing the things that we need to do to make sure that our needs are met, we are not going to be able to show up for our kids the way that we need to. In fact, it is kind of contrary. The two sides are kind of contrary to one another in that we are expected to show up calm and regulated and steady, but the stress and the chaos of our environment can actually cause us to not be able to do those things. And so we have to figure out how to make the two things work together. And the in-between piece really is self-care.
I love that. So that working definition, one of the words that you used in that working definition was health. And I think sometimes we get really stuck on the word health. Would you be able to expand a little bit on what kind of health you're talking about when you talk about self-care is taking care of your health?
Yeah, it's really all aspects of our health. All of it comes together. We want to take a very holistic approach to what health looks like. So that means we're making sure that our physical needs get met, much like we would do for our kids. Like if we think about our kids, we're going to make sure that their physical needs are being met, that they're getting food, water, the right kind of nutrition, that they're not just eating candy all day, right? We're making sure that they're getting sleep. But we're also making sure that their environment is conducive to them having some downtime, to their brains being able to settle. We're making sure that they have relational connection with other people. And we're also making sure that whatever spiritual practices that you put in place in your home, that our kids have that as well. And so the same is true for us. We want to work through all of those different aspects for us to make sure that our needs are being met, that our mental health is where it needs to be, that our relational health is where it needs to be. We need people pouring into us, just like our kids need people pouring into them. And our kids are not able to meet that need for us, that relational need, right? So we need to make sure that we have people pouring into us, but we also need to make, and one of the things that I have noticed is that physical well-being is the one that's usually the most lacking for parents. They know that they need community. They feel that pull for community, but we think nothing about skipping meals until the middle of the afternoon and then, just grabbing a processed food snack to kind of ease that before dinner. Because we're so busy meeting our kids' needs, we kind of neglect ourselves in that process.
Yeah, that resonates. It's definitely one of those areas that most of the moms I know, and not just moms of kids with a history of trauma or prenatal exposure or other challenges, but any mom I know, they put themselves on the burner way back at the back of the stove. Why do you think so many of us resist that necessity or neglect our self-care? Why do we resist that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. And I think the first one really is about we have so many needs in our homes. We
Yep.
have so much going on. We are so busy. And in our house, we have a lot of kids. And one of the phrases that we've used quite often is the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Like the loudest need is often the one that we meet first. And so a lot of times we're meeting the needs of our kids because we can kind of calm that for a little while in us. And so we may not see the need. We may not really see that it's there, but it is.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's quietly like building up in the background. And so that's one of the reasons I think a lot of times we're just so focused on our kids' needs, and their needs can be so loud that we go to meet those first. And we think we don't have time for the other things. But the other part of this, Tracy, is that I really think as parents, we prefer to work on what our kids need to fix. We prefer to work on their healing, to work on their things versus really looking at ourselves. Are we, making sure that our past wounds are healed? Are we making sure that our physical needs are being met? Are we making sure that we can stay calm and regulated in those moments where our kids need us to be?
Yeah, that self-reflection and that honest self-assessment can be very daunting when you're already kind of depleted from taking care of everyone else's needs.
Plus, I would much rather be the helper than the one being helped.
Yes.
And I think a
Yeah.
lot of foster parents are like that. It's one of the reasons why we have so many struggles reaching out for other people to help us with tangible needs. But in the same manner, we don't want to look at the needs in ourselves. We don't want to look at ourselves as deficient in any way.
Right. And as adults, we've gotten pretty adept most of the time at delayed gratification, delayed satisfaction over accomplishments and things like that. So it becomes just this habitual thing where we're putting aside our needs. I'll take care of it later. I can wait, when maybe my 3-year-old can't wait or my 13-year-old can't wait. But that waiting, it feels like can come back to bite us later. And it sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yes. I mean, it definitely will come back to bite you every single time. I know for me, like we adopted a sibling group of 5. And so we took 5 at once, which is daunting, right? Because you're trying to get everybody adjusted at
Mm-hmm.
the same time. And we had fostered for a long time, and I was
Mm-hmm.
already training foster parents. And so I thought I kind of knew what I was doing. I was trauma informed, but I was meeting all of their needs, trying to meet all of their needs over and over and over again, and neglecting myself. And I got to a point where I couldn't meet their needs anymore. I knew what to do. I knew how to do it, but my body just couldn't do it. I wasn't able to connect. I wasn't able to be calm and steady and regulated all the time. I wasn't able to be consistent because I had neglected myself for so long. And I think that that's really common amongst parents. I also think, especially for parents in faith communities, there is a big stigma around looking at ourselves. Like it's supposed to be you die to self, you serve others, all of that kind of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so it can get very muddy when we're looking at the culture's term of self-care in what is self-indulgence, right? And so it has framed all of self-care as kind of self-indulgent versus self-sacrificial. And the way that I want parents to really see self-care is that this is a way that you're sacrificing for your kids. This is the way that you are going to be able to show up for them on a regular basis. This is the hard work that it takes to be what they need.
That's such an excellent point. And I appreciate what you say about, the messaging that we get maybe in faith communities, but I think the foster and adoptive community, you could probably ask any foster or adoptive mom and she will have heard at least once or twice, "Oh, you're such a saint."
Yes.
"Oh, you're such good people for doing this work." And while we don't always want to receive that message, it often also, that message can prevent us from taking care of our own needs, because taking care of self doesn't feel consistent with, "Oh, you're such a saint." And it's not just in the faith community is what I'm saying, but yeah, that's such a great point.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that putting us up on a pedestal like that can be so damaging in lots of areas, but it does make me feel like I have to live up to everybody else's standards. And so I agree. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why we strive to not only, you know, be sacrificial. I mean, we want to serve others. We have a heart to serve. It's why most of us got into this to begin
Mm-hmm.
with. But when people put you up on that pedestal that you are this servant, that you are this person that is an angel, that is a
Right.
hero, all the terms, right? It puts even more pressure on us to actually live up to that expectation, which we can't, by the way.
No one can. No one can. Would you do us a favor? We would love it if you could leave a rating or a review to help us get this content and more like it into the hands of the families like yours who need it. If you are listening to us on Spotify, you can select the highlighted rating on the podcast page and leave a stars review. Or you can leave a written comment or review by commenting on the podcast below the show notes. If you're listening on Apple, you can leave a rating or review by going to the Creating a Family podcast page, scroll to the bottom of the page for the review, and then tap the stars to leave a rating, or scroll below that to write a review. And if you're watching us on YouTube, just give us a thumbs up and leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel if you really like what you're hearing. And now back to our show. So, what are some of the benefits of a well-rounded approach to self-care that would kind of move the needle for someone who would say to you, "I'm too busy for self-care," or "Self-care is selfish"? What would be some of the benefits that you would tell them about?
Well, I think there's obviously some physical benefits. I mean, the stress over time, prolonged stress is going to affect your physical wellness. It is. My husband had a heart attack 2 years ago. I mean, like my blood pressure was high. I'd gained like 50 pounds. I mean, it is going to impact your physical health and your ability to be there and show up for your kids. But the other part of it is about regulation.
Mhm.
We need to be the steady, regulated one for our kids. We need to be able to show up and be consistent. And if our body is in fight or flight because we are not taking care of it, then we're not going to be able to show up for them and be connected. So we're actually going to see more dysregulation in our household, not just from us, but everybody, because we as the parents are the ones that set the peace for the household. So if our bodies are in turmoil, if our bodies are dysregulated and in fight or flight, even if we're able to mask it, right? Like even if it's not coming out in us yelling or something like that, but it's just the anxiousness inside of us, it's going to create an environment of anxiousness in our house, and our kids are not going to have that felt safety that they need. And so I think one of the best benefits that I saw when I started working on my health was the peace in my house. It wasn't even that I changed tangible things. It was just I was calm and regulated. And so the rest of my house felt that, and it made them feel safer and more regulated.
So physically, you're looking at better energy levels and better physical regulation. Emotionally, you're looking at more peace in the home and clarity in the interactions that you have to have, even when they're hard. Emotionally, obviously, that regulation piece is key to having successful conversations and helping your kids grow. I think another benefit that I love to point out to parents is the role modeling of caring for themselves well. We want our kids to thrive and to succeed, and we want our kids to learn how to take care of themselves well. But if they don't see that model, then
Yeah.
they're never going to learn it, because we could preach all the day long, but our words don't matter if our actions aren't following it.
Exactly, exactly. They are watching what we're doing and they feel our energy, right? Like, have you ever seen like an anxious person pick up a baby? They may be saying all the right things in the right tone, but the anxiety within them is going to make that anxiety kick up in that child. And so it's the same way with older kids too. Our anxiety is going to do that, even if we're able to mask it on the outside. But the other part is, if you think about our kids, when our kids are in fight or flight, their upper brains don't work. Their executive function is off. Their ability to think logically and make decisions, all of that stuff is off for our kids. We know that. If they go all day without eating, it's a surefire thing that they're going to have a meltdown, right? But the same thing is true for us. So if we're not taking care of our needs, then our brain is not going to function the way that it's meant to. We're not going to be able to think clearly. We're not going to be able to make good, logical decisions. And that decision fatigue actually creeps into a lot of the reason why people don't implement self-care, because they get into these situations and they just can't see how to implement new habits.
And it sounds to me like you're saying also, specifically say for the foster community, when we are at that level of depletion and we can't make wise, well-founded decisions, that might be contributing factors to instability in a placement. So many times we hear about instability in a foster placement as something that is behaviorally related, something the child is doing.
Sure.
But I'm hearing you say that lack of self-care and a holistic approach to our self-care can be something that would be another factor that maybe we haven't identified as related to instability in a placement.
Absolutely. Because if there are behaviors, but you're taking care of yourself. Now, I mean, there are certain levels of behaviors that may be unsafe for the home. So I'm not talking about those environments.
Right.
But when there are behaviors, in the beginning, you may be able to deal with them. But over time, it's going to wear on you if you're not managing that stress within your own body. If you're not taking care of yourself, then your ability to handle those situations are
Mhm.
going to deplete over time, and it's going to start to affect you more. And so you're more likely to disrupt, you're more likely to not be able to carry out that placement long term if you're not taking care of yourself, because over time, it's just going to, the way that it's affecting your body is going to change.
Yeah, those cumulative effects can be so detrimental, not just for us, but then for the children in our care as well.
Yeah. And so we're creating instability in them, right? And even without trying, like we're trying to create an environment of connection and stability. But
Mhm.
if we're panicking on the inside constantly because our physical needs aren't being
Right,
met,
right.
right? Then we're not creating that felt safety for them. So we're not actually helping them heal, which is the one thing we really want to do most of the
Right,
time, you know?
right. That's why we started doing what we're doing, is we
Absolutely.
love the opportunity to help a child heal. So, what are some of the indicators in our life that would tell us, maybe we should be focusing on our self-care a little bit more, like symptoms or um, yellow flags, some people call them? What would you be looking for? What should we be looking for?
Well, first of all, I think everybody should make sure that they're implementing self-care habits from the beginning before they even get placement. Because
Mhm.
if you're feeling the symptoms, it's going to be much harder to implement. Because again, once those symptoms kick in, that decision fatigue is going to kick in and it's going to be harder to implement at that point. But I think that you can notice when some of those yellow flags are creeping in, things like fatigue.
Mhm.
If you're having to take a nap every day, unless you have newborns or you have kids that don't sleep at night, right? There's an
Right,
exception there,
right.
but that is not normal. And I think we've kind of normalized moms being tired all the time just because they have a lot on their plate. But you guys, if you are taking care of your body, if you're strengthening your body, you can have a lot on your plate and still feel energized throughout the day. You may be exhausted at the end of the day, right? Like you may be, my head hits the pillow and I'm done.
You will be.
But
We'll say it that way. You
you
will be
will be.
exhausted at the
You
end of
will
the
be.
day.
You will be. But throughout the day, you shouldn't have to take a nap every single day. If you're irritable, if you're easy to snap at your kids, if you see that you are starting to struggle to connect with your kids, or even you're struggling to have the desire to want to connect with your kids, I think that is even past yellow flag. I think we're running into red flag category at that point,
Mhm.
in that you're not taking care of yourself enough in order to be able to manage whatever's happening throughout the day. And I will say some situations are going to require more self-care than others. They may require more breaks. It may require, more time away, more walks, more nutrition, more all of the things than others. Sometimes it's just harder, right? Some situations
Right.
are just harder.
Yeah, whether it's a season that you're going through with a particular child or welcoming a new child that has some pretty complex medical issues or complex history of trauma, when those complexities increase, then our self-care and attention to our internal state needs to also increase.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So let's get into the framework of your holistic approach. You talked at the beginning about physical wellness, emotional and mental wellness, and spiritual wellness. Can you kind of break down each one for us and give us an idea of maybe where's a good place to start or how you get people started?
Yeah, so we really, I think when I work with parents, foster and adoptive parents and kinship parents are actually the easiest to work with. Once you get them past a certain point, because they already know the tools. We're already doing these things for our kids. So we know how to empower our kids to do well. And so you already, most parents already have the tools. So when we're looking at physical wellness, culture is going to say, hey, if you've gained a little weight or, you need to work on your health, you want to eat less and you want to work out more. And we're actually going to flip that on its head for us because in the situations that we're in, that kind of diet culture mentality is actually going to stress our bodies out a whole lot more. And it's going to pile stuff on top of us. It's going to make us feel worse. And so what I teach my clients to do is to work out less. So we want to move. We want to move our bodies strategically. We want to build muscle. We want gentle movement like walking. But we want to do less of it. We don't want to do long runs or long cardio workouts that are really going to stress out our bodies. We also want to make sure that we're eating at regular intervals. So I tell my clients to make sure they're eating every 3 hours. And we do something called macro counting, where we're tracking the amount of protein and carbs and fats that we're eating, not counting calories. The goal is not to eat under what our goal is. The goal is to eat what our goal says. So if our goal is to eat 120 grams of protein, I want my clients to at least hit that number every single day, because that's how you're going to fuel your body.
Right.
And so you want to make sure that you're eating at those regular intervals, that you are eating enough of the right foods, but you're also eating mainly whole foods, because a lot of the processed foods that we're eating are actually causing inflammation and stress within our bodies. And so that's making our bodies go into fight, flight, or freeze before we even do anything else, right? Just by what we're putting in. If we're putting in stuff, extra additives, seed oil type stuff, that is going to make our bodies go into fight, flight, or freeze. And when we're talking about physical wellness, we also want to talk about water, making sure that we're getting hydration, making sure we're getting sleep, that sort of thing. It's nothing huge, right? Like there's no big revelation that here's this one thing that you can do to change everything. It's the normal habits that we know we should be doing anyway, but we're just resistant, or sometimes we feel stuck and we can't get into them.
And as a TBRI practitioner, that we're told when we are welcoming children into our home, feed them every 2 to 3 hours, focus on high lean proteins, hydrate them every 2 to 3 hours, get them the water bottles and all the things that help them, want to drink more water, and focus on their sleep. And it's all the things that we, like you said earlier, are doing for our kids to help them heal and to help them thrive. And adapting this mentality and building these rhythms of self-care mean doing those same things for ourselves.
For us. Because our bodies are dealing, if you're parenting kids with previous trauma history, you are experiencing trauma.
Right.
You are experiencing stress. And so your brain, even though it's more mature, and so you may be able to mask it better, your brain works exactly the same way as your child's does. And so if you're not getting those same things, then your body is going to be prone to go into that fight, flight, or freeze state.
So let's tackle the emotional and mental wellness part of your framework.
Yeah. So again, this is the same as it is for our kids. And this is why, this demographic of people is really primed to take care of their health if they can make that shift.
Right.
Because we know our kids need connection in order to heal and stay regulated, and so do we. And so we have to find community within the foster care and adoption community, I would say, in order to find the support and empathy that we need. People outside of that community a lot of times just don't understand our parenting styles. They don't understand what's going on in our homes. And so when we say, hey, this is what happened today in my house, you get this blank stare, because people just don't have any kind of frame of reference for what's really going on in our homes, right? And that kind of resistance doesn't give us the reciprocity that we need out of relationship to be able to feel safe
Mm-hmm.
So we need relationships where we can say hard things. And maybe that parent hasn't experienced the exact same thing we've experienced, but they have an understanding of the background and where it comes from. And so we're getting some sort of reciprocity, some sort of feedback that allows us to feel safe and connected with other individuals.
And at this point, I'm going to put a big plug in for the various community groups that Creating a Family offers. First of all, we have a very large online community on Facebook, facebook.com/groups/creating a family. But we also have specific virtual meetings that occur across the month for post-adoptive and foster families. But also, we also just recently launched online kinship groups for those who are raising grandchildren, nieces and nephews, etc. If people are interested in those resources, they can always reach out to info@creatingafamily.org to figure out which group is the right one for them to plug into and find that community. Those are the places I hang out when I'm looking for connection and community. So I'm excited to be able to plug those for this conversation. Can we talk a little bit about spiritual wellness? And certainly not everyone in our audience is practicing of a particular faith, but the elements of spirituality definitely still contribute to our wellness. And I'd like to hear how you tackle that with families.
Yeah, I think for, some of us got into this space because of our spiritual background or our faith. And I think especially when that is the case, I think we have to make sure that we're staying connected in that area. So whatever that means, whether it's prayer, whether it's a gratitude journal, even if you're not practicing a certain faith, gratitude journals are huge just to kind of connect with the things that you can be grateful for and to step outside of ourselves. I think if we get too focused on our hurts, our pain, what we're experiencing, right, then we get a very negative mental state. And practicing gratitude, things like that, singing praise and worship, or even just singing regular songs, that humming, that vocalization can really regulate our system. It triggers that vagus nerve, right, to kind of go into a state where it's calming for our bodies and our internal systems. So all of that kind of stuff can be very regulating. It can really help us stay grounded as we are dealing with some hard things. If we are constantly just in the chaos and not taking time away to reflect and to really ground ourselves, it can be challenging to stay in that. We all need to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture sometimes.
I love that. And the gratitude journal can be as simple as a sentence or two in an actual handwritten journal. I heard of a great implementation of gratitude recently where there's a jar on the table and everyone in the family is free to take a slip of paper, write one or two things they're grateful for and stick it in the jar. And if you have a day in the context of that family where you were having a hard time finding something to be grateful for, you were also invited to reach into the jar and pull something out and read it out loud. And the act of not just writing it when you are grateful, but the act of saying something out loud when you're struggling to be grateful just kind of rewires your brain for a different perspective than you walked up to that jar having. And I thought that was a really unique and creative way for that parent, not just to exercise daily the muscle of gratitude for themselves, but then also modeling and teaching that very practically to their children. I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, I often think our kids a lot of times are so much more emotionally mature than their peer counterparts, even if their brains aren't there yet, right? But they have the language. A lot of times they have the skill set to be able to work through things that I didn't learn, right, growing up, that nobody told me how to express my emotions or how to express gratitude, how to breathe through different things. My kids know how their brains work. So they can say, oops, my brain, my lid is flipped, whatever it is, my kids can give you that terminology and tell you what's physically happening in their bodies at the moment, which I think is so neat.
Yeah, building that emotional intelligence, modeling it, and then building it in our kids,
Yes.
it yields
Yes.
such great benefits, not just for the individual, but I've seen in our home that it builds our family unit or our family identity as a whole. And when our kids are anchored into something bigger than themselves and they feel safe and secure in that anchoring, that tells me I'm doing a good job with not just my self-care, but teaching them how to take care of themselves, because we all need, and I think that's the thing about spiritual wellness that is so appealing to me, is we all need that anchoring into something bigger than ourselves, whether it's a specific faith practice or a religion or, again, that gratitude practice. If we're anchoring ourselves and then teaching our children to anchor themselves, it ends up being a very beautiful bonding experience for our families and just creates that network of safety that they can fall back into.
Yeah, that one of the things that I do in moments that are really hard, so during meltdowns or whatever, is for me, we come from a Christian faith background, and so I'll turn on worship music
Mm-hmm.
because in the moment it takes me outside of that hard moment.
Mm-hmm.
It helps me realize in that moment that the world is not actually falling
Right.
because of this moment, right? Like it takes me outside of that moment to look at the bigger picture.
Yep. Yep. I love that. So if you're not somebody who's ever regularly practiced self-care rhythms of any kind, give us a starting point. How do you get started?
Yeah, start very small, one habit at a time. I generally tell people to start with water. So for a week, just make sure that you drink half of your body weight in ounces in water. That's it. That's all I want you to do for a week, right? And then once you get that habit down, then we're going to add another habit. So
Okay.
maybe the next week we add in walking. So take 10, 15, 20 minutes, go for a walk. At some point in the day, some of my clients that are super, super busy, they even split it up throughout the day. So they'll do 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night, but just adding in one habit at a time. There are some of my clients that are not they're not in a moment where things are so stressful or busy. And so maybe we add 2 or 3 habits in at a time, but don't add in more than you can handle. And then I always tell clients to stall where they stall. So if you're doing, right, like if you add in water and then you add in walking and then you add in nutrition, but your nutrition is really kind of struggling, I want you to stop there until you get that under control before you add in more things.
I think the popular term for it now is called habit stacking.
Yes.
And it sounds to me like you're saying stacking those habits, it's like that cumulative effect. You find success with the water, so then you're going to find success. You'll have that confidence that will then want you to find success with, say, the movement.
Yes. Well, and part of that habit stacking too, and this is a great tip, is like true habit stacking is about taking a habit that you already have, right? So I drink my coffee every single morning. While my coffee is brewing, I drink a glass of water. So I'm adding in the water with something that I'm already doing.
Mm-hmm.
I already do coffee. So now I'm going to attach drinking a glass of water to me drinking my coffee. I'm going to make sure that that gets done at the same time. So it's taking that one habit that I already have that is already a part of my day and attaching something else to it that I want to add in.
That's fantastic. What a great, simple tip to start with. So, when we've established one or two of these healthier habits, how do we kind of start looking at it as an overall rhythm of self-care for our home?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways. I think if you are able, in the same way that we look at those rhythms for our kids, so we plan out time for them to eat. We plan out their day. We plan out time for them to move. We want to do the same for us. We want to set ourselves up for success. So a couple of the ways that I do that is I always look at my week ahead. Generally on a Sunday, I'll throw a couple of chicken breasts into the crock pot and just have some shredded chicken on hand, because protein is usually the hardest to make sure that you are prepared with. And so I'll make sure that I get that out of the way, that I can add that shredded chicken to a tortilla. I can add it to a salad. I can add it to some pasta, whatever, right? It's easy for me to add in to kind of anything. So I'll set myself up for success in that. But I'm also going to plan out where my workouts, where my walking, where my other habits are going to fit in through the week. Because for me, every week looks a little different. And so really planning that stuff out ahead of time. And sometimes, as we all know, sometimes everything works as planned and sometimes it doesn't, right? Like I had a child melting down this morning and I had to cut my workout a little short. It didn't mean that I didn't do it. It just meant that it looked a little different. And so I think giving ourselves grace in that, but really planning things out ahead of time. But the other part of this is there are a lot of parents, I think, especially in our space, that are already in that yellow flag, red flag, burnout zone. And if you're there, decision fatigue may paralyze you. It may be really, really hard to add in habits because your executive function part of your brain is not working. And in that case, a lot of my clients that come to me are in that space. And the reason that they need a coach, they need somebody to walk with them, is because they're in that decision fatigue space. They need somebody to kind of hold their hand through the process. And so maybe that's a coach. Maybe that's just a friend who is walking through this with you and can kind of hold you accountable, and somebody that can help you think through how to fit things into your day.
Okay, wow. So accountability, I heard in there. I heard mindfulness about your schedule and your routine and paying attention to your family's overall rhythms. I'm a big planner. So at the end of every week, I write out the family calendar for the next week. And I learned the hard way that I couldn't write the calendar out for the whole month because it would short circuit and fry some of my family members' brains who are more immediate thinkers than I am. And so I found a calendar that works just for a week. And I keep the monthly calendar private. And then I look at, what we can add or not add or say no thank you to that would interrupt a flow that works for whoever's living at home at the time. Like right now we have 2 kids living at home. When all 6 kids were living at home, obviously our flow was very different.
Right.
So that mindfulness. So you're talking about mindfulness, you're talking about accountability, and I appreciate the added conversation about grace. That is a challenge that I find many of our families who listen to our podcast regularly. Giving their kids grace is something they've accomplished very well. And I love seeing and hearing the gracious, compassionate, tender ways they respond to their kids. But I think sometimes we forget to offer ourselves that same level of grace and self-compassion.
Absolutely. I will say though, I think it's a delicate balance because I think we want to give ourselves grace, but we also really have to make this a priority. These are not things that are going to happen on their own. And so if we have to say no, you just mentioned, sometimes you have to say no to things. This has to be a top priority. It just does. I mean, if we are managing this stress in our home, if we're managing trauma in our home, then we have to be able to support our bodies through that, or we're not going to be able to do it well. So we may have to say no to some other commitments so that we can make this a priority.
Let me take a minute to tell you about our library of free courses, thanks to the generosity of our partners at Jockey Being Family Foundation. You can take one course or all 15, but every single one of them is designed to strengthen your family in some way. Go to bit.ly/JBF support. That's bit.ly/JBF bit.ly/JBFSUPPORT. And again, tell a friend about the courses after you've taken one or two that you particularly enjoy. Thanks so much, and let's get back to the interview. So, where do practices like meal planning, budgeting, home management, and all those, some people would call them drudgeries of life, but the realities of life, where can those fit into our building of rhythms of self-care?
Well, I mean, I think it's part of our self-care in the way that we create structure for our kids, and it's part of what helps them feel safe. I think those things help us feel safe. When we have a week that's planned out, when we have a structure to our day, when we have some routines that we do on a normal basis, it helps our body feel safe. So maybe it doesn't happen at the exact same time every day, but we have a general flow of things that we do every single day or most days. And our self-care fits in that. I mean, I think that our self-care habits are part of that flow, but they are also the flow itself, like creating that structure, budgets, meal planning, all of that kind of stuff can help our bodies kind of relax and feel safe.
And how about socialization or engaging with respite care or engaging with your support network? How do you fit those things into a healthy rhythm of self-care in your home?
Yeah, well, it's part of creating rest. It's part of creating connection time with other people. That is part of the self-care. I think, we get too limited on what self-care is, and we have to look at it more holistically. So we have to be fitting those things in all the time. And it may vary on how often you have to do it based off of the season that you're in. We talked about that a little bit before, but like, for example, my husband takes my kids to his in-laws. Usually once a quarter, they live out of state, and he leaves me at home. And that is my time to relax. And there have been a couple of times where they haven't taken the trip at a certain season, but I really needed it. And so I went to a hotel for a night or two just to kind of get that break. There was a season where I needed to do that every single month because I needed that mental break every single month. I don't need it every single month right now, but I still need that respite. Even though we don't have formal respite care anymore, I still need that rest or that break. So we have to build that in to our self-care plan. We have to build in our time with community. So maybe it's an online community like you were talking about. So every, Monday night you do this support group or whatever it is, right? But you build that into your self-care plan because that connection with other people is just as important as your workout in the morning. All of those things kind of feed into your well-being.
Yeah, and when we're not intentional, like you were talking about, we can easily get so focused on creating that for our kids that we forget to be intentional to create it for ourselves. And then we look up and find that we don't have it when we really need it. And that slow fade of saying yes to all the needs and forgetting that our needs should be included in that, it makes it harder to pull that back and say, okay, it's time to re-anchor, refocus, and get back to the healthy rhythm that we were, enjoying before. What do you recommend for parents or caregivers who look up one day and find themselves in that spot, whether it's that they don't have a solid support network or they've just let all of the elements of their self-care that they did, like their meal planning or their budgeting or their grocery pickup, all those, they look up and all of those things are out of balance or have disappeared from the landscape of their family rhythm?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I take regular time away. I always take at least 2 nights. The first night I rest and kind of decompress. And the second night is my planning. The second night is I kind of evaluate, where are we? What do we need to shift? What is working? What is not working? And sometimes that's a parenting strategy. Sometimes that's my self-care stuff. Sometimes that's planning time for me just to get things in order, right? But it's that regular time for me to kind of plan ahead. And I think we all need to set aside times to evaluate how things are going and where things are. But again, if you're in a season where you are depleted, where you are burnt out, and your brain just can't process through that, you have to seek help. You have to seek somebody from the outside that can walk through that with you.
So when you say seek help, you've mentioned earlier that you do parent coaching.
Yep.
Would that also include, your therapist, or
Yes.
so you could talk to your therapist about that? Do you find that a lot of families who come to you have not taken advantage of therapeutic services before?
I think most of the parents that have come to me are in therapy.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. That's comforting to hear.
But because I think I see a lot of parents, the parents that come to me, especially that come to me for health and wellness services, are in pretty extreme situations, a lot of them, right? And so they understand the importance of therapy for their kids and for themselves. But in the general foster care and adoption community, I don't see parents investing in themselves as a whole at all, whether it's therapy or wellness or, any of those things, just because so much focus is put on the kids.
That's why it's one of my soapboxes that
Yeah.
I mean, I have a daughter and a daughter-in-law who just recently became parents, and I've already started talking to them. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, drink more water, get more sleep. Let me babysit and you take a night out, get a break, do what you need to do to take care of yourself, because my grandfather used to say, happy moms make happy babies.
Yes.
And it's true.
Yes.
Not just of babies. I see it even in my teenagers.
Yes. Well, I think all the way around, like we've got to stop looking at investing in ourselves as being selfish or whatever. Investing in ourselves is really about our kids. That is how we show up for our kids. That is how we are steady for our kids. It's really how we invest in them.
So let's talk the practicals then. Give me, your top 3, 4, 5 practical tips that would help one of our listeners get started today.
Yeah, walking is my number one. That is my non-negotiable every single day. It completely shifted everything for me. So if you are not walking every single day, that is your first and only goal. Is to put that into your routine, because I think it is so, so crucial for mental health, for emotional health, for physical health. I mean, just all the things. It touches on all the spots. And if you walk with a friend, then you get that relational part in at the same time. For me, it's also my spiritual time. That's my prayer time. That's my, kind of quiet moments where I can kind of reflect. So walking is the one. I will also say most people don't think about strength training and how that relates to parenting, but building muscle actually helps us process stress. And so that the bigger our muscles are, the more muscle we have built up, the more resilient the rest of our bodies are, the more stress that we are able to process in our bodies. So strength training is another huge one. And the last one I'm going to say, because people don't often think about it, and especially for us as parents that are sometimes dealing with picky eaters and that kind of stuff, is making sure that we're eating whole foods. Whole foods are usually your one ingredient foods. We want to focus on whole food nutrition because it is going to help our body not be so inflamed. It's going to help us nourish and fuel our body the right way. And if we're putting in junk, then we are actually causing stress on our body. And I don't know about you, Tracy, but I don't need any more stress.
No, I do not need more stress.
I have plenty as it is.
Oh, well, thank you, Nicole, for your time and your wisdom and your expertise. I'm so grateful for your commitment to helping foster, adoptive, and kinship families find wellness and build rhythms of self-care in their homes. And I hope that families find this information from today's conversation very helpful.
Thank you.